Hi, you're watching Boudica's Lost Tribe on the Time Team official YouTube channel with me, Tony Robinson. Boudica, the greatest heroine of early Britain.
She is the image of our warrior past.
Leader of the Iceni tribe. These mysterious people left behind some of the greatest treasures of their age.
The earliest style of art that is recognisably British.
It took immense skill to create these objects.
It's molten. Now this is scary.
But the coming of the Romans threatened the Iceni way of life until Boudica led an uprising.
They have been waiting years for this. They're the pressure cooker about to blow the lid.
Boudica's small tribe dared to take on the full might of the Roman Empire.
They're killing everything they can get their hands on, men, women and children.
And they paid the price with their blood.
Total destruction, disorder, chaos.
It's brutal, it's deadly, and it's horrific.
Can a new dig tell us more about what happened to Boudica and her people in the aftermath of the revolt? July the 20th, 1928, a small airfield in Norfolk. Two RAF reconnaissance pilots are about to set out on a life-changing trip. Their mission? Take aerial photographs of a farmer's field 2 miles south of Norwich, close to the tiny hamlet of Caistor St Edmund. At ground level, these fields look like nothing out of the ordinary. But from the air, it was a different story. Down in the parched grass below was the visible outline of the street grid of an entire Roman town. It was better than they dared to hope for. The pilots were looking at Venta Icenorum, the largest and most important Roman city in northern East Anglia. The Times published the photos, creating an overnight sensation. Aerial photography was the geophysics of its time, real cutting-edge stuff. Public donations funded a major dig led by Professor Donald Atkinson. He found a forum, public baths, temples, all the indications of a major Roman town. And then it went quiet. The field reverted back to agricultural land and for the next 80 years remained unexplored. Until now. For the first time since the 1920s, a new team are about to dig this site. And this time around, the Roman remains aren't the main attraction. Brand new technology has allowed archaeologists to create a complete plan of the buried town in extraordinary detail, and it's turned out to be much more significant than anyone originally thought. But it's not the Roman town that's causing all the excitement, it's what lies beneath it that's got everyone talking. Will Bowden and his colleagues from the University of Nottingham have got just 6 weeks to get to grips with Venta Icenorum. They think they may be picking up signs of significant Iron Age structures beneath the Roman town. These could be the traces of a much older Iceni settlement. We know that this part of Norfolk was at the very heart of Iceni territory. And if Boudica had a capital anywhere, this is where you might expect to find it. This really is spectacularly good geophys, isn't it? I can see the traditional Roman town layout, the grid, the square system, but where on earth is the Iron Age stuff? I would have expected to see circles, and I can't see any.
Well, when you stare at it for hours and hours, you can start to pick them out. We've got a large circular feature up here, a smaller one down here, and then another small one up here.
And if they are circles, they would be likely to be Iron Age roundhouses rather than the squarer buildings that the Romans built.
It's possible. Iron Age roundhouses, these round forms of building, actually continue throughout the Roman period. But the fact is that some of these seem to be cut by the streets of the Roman town.
So they're older than that?
We think they're older.
So what reasons might there have been for the Romans building their town slap bang on top of an Iceni settlement?
There are a number of possibilities. It could be a repressive measure in the aftermath of the Boudican revolt. It could be favouring a faction of the Iceni that didn't take part in the revolt. It could reflect the location of a military settlement that was here in the aftermath of the revolt. So there are a number of possibilities.
It's now down to the archaeologists to find physical evidence of the Iceni settlement underlying the Roman town. Only then may they be able to establish exactly what happened to the Iceni and to their town in the aftermath of Boudica's uprising. At Caistor St Edmund in Norfolk, a dig is getting underway at the Roman settlement of Venta Icenorum. There'll be 2 major new trenches, and these could transform our understanding of the site. The results may ultimately shed new light on the fate of the Iceni, the tribe who lived in this area. In 60 AD, they were led by Boudica to rebel against the Roman occupation. The Iceni lived all across the lands we today know as Norfolk, yet until recently we knew next to nothing about them. Many historians still thought of them as a primitive, backward tribe. But then, in 1948, a surprise discovery changed everything. A farmer ploughing his fields at Snettisham in northwest Norfolk found a lump of dirty old metal. Thinking it was part of an old brass bedstead, he tossed it away. For a week, it lay in a hedgerow. But when further fragments of metal kept on turning up, experts from Norwich Museum were called in. They soon realised it wasn't old scrap. It was a gold torq. In total, they found an incredible haul of 175 objects in the area. The torqs found here in Norfolk are some of the most significant archaeological finds in the entire world and the greatest symbol of the Iron Age people. Neither the Romans, nor the Greeks, or the Chinese could make anything comparable in gold at that time. Far from being a backwater tribe, as the archaeologists originally thought, the Iceni were technological wizards when it came to metalworking. The Snettisham torqs are the richest collection of Iron Age metalwork ever discovered, and they seem to have been made by Boudica's people, the Iceni. Torqs are large metallic neck rings, precious objects found across many Iron Age Celtic cultures.
It was like a crown. I mean, the torq is a direct equivalent, I think, of a crown. It's an object which is extremely valuable and only worn by the very top people. You know, everyone else had elaborate swords, elaborate scabbards, and all of that sort of thing, but it was just a very few people who had these elaborate torqs. And they had some superbly good craftsmen who were working on what was the earliest style of art that is recognisably British.
As archaeologists further examined the Snettisham torqs, there were further surprises in store. Some had been buried in careful layers of bronze, silver, and then gold, with each layer covered in several inches of soil. Along with other torqs found in Norfolk, they were taken to the British Museum. Only now are museum scientists able to deploy the latest technology to unlock the secrets of the torqs. Among a barrage of tests, they were studied under scanning electron microscopes, or SEMs. The process soon revealed tiny details, traces left by the people who wore them 2,000 years ago.
And in the SEM, we can look at that and look in terms of the wear patterns that are from the use of the object. So the wear we see is around here. Do you see where the two wires are rubbed together and actually worn each other out? So when it was actually in use, it would flex, and you take it on, you put it off, and it will rub together. And this is how we know that it has been used in antiquity, and probably for quite some time before it was buried.
The torques turned out to be composed of unusual alloys of copper, silver and gold. Scientists were able to show that by repeatedly hammering the metal, the Iceni craftsmen were actually changing the chemical composition of the outer surface.
We get very excited when we do a polished section. You can see, actually, that what nobody else has ever seen, even the metallurgists couldn't see it themselves. The core here is actually copper-rich, and the white areas on the outside are actually silver and gold-rich. They've actually removed most of the copper from the actual outside to leave the rich colour that they wanted, the sort of gold, silvery colour, rather than a copper core.
So the hammering process changes the appearance of the torques, removing copper and allowing the gold or silver to shine through. But the archaeologists were still left scratching their heads. Over 100 of the 175 Snettisham torques were found in fragments. And as the scientists studied them further, it became clear that most hadn't been damaged by ploughs or the ravages of time.
And we can see from the SEM micrographs very clearly these cut marks. They've used a chisel and hammered it and cut straight through to totally destroy that particular torque.
The Iceni had deliberately broken their torques before putting them in the ground. For the archaeologists, it was a baffling mystery. Why would they cut up their most prized possessions, their crown jewels?
It's difficult to know why you would destroy something as beautiful as a torque. I think it very much has to do with the idea of giving something back to the ground. So if you are burying something, it may be an offering in some way. But you might not want to give all of that back. You might want to keep some of it back for redistribution in other ceremonies, or you may even want to only give a certain amount and then melt down the rest to make another artefact.
Painstaking analysis of the torques gave the British Museum crucial clues as to how they were made. It was obvious the Iceni must have been master craftsmen using some highly sophisticated techniques. Time Team's Helen Geek is at Chatham Historic Docks to meet Dana Goodburn-Brown, metal conservation specialist. Together, they're going to attempt to make a replica torque using Iron Age craft skills.
So it's made up of lots and lots of really thin little wires.
Impressive, isn't it?
So one of these big strands has got 3 strands within it, and each one of those is made up of 2 twisted together. So if there's 48 lengths of wire, how long is that in total?
We think that's like close to 19 metres of wire.
Golly. And how on earth do you make this wire? It's so fine.
In the past, this had to be hand hammered.
Yeah.
So you would cast it as far as you could in thickness, and then you place it on the anvil. You turn it while you're hammering, and it slowly starts to elongate, and then carry on hammering it.
So it would be like rolling out a long sausage of plasticine in a way, but instead of using your hands to press, you've got to use a hammer.
Exactly. Because just like with dough, you put a bit of water in if it's starting to crack.
Yeah.
With metal, you have to heat it up. And then, and when you heat it up, it oxidizes, and then you dip it in acid, and then you get going again.
Okay.
See how you feel.
Right.
Beating the metal lengthens the wire and removes copper from the surface, but it's heavy going. Helen and Dana have worked out that it would take them 80 days of non-stop hammering to make enough wire for their torque, so they've decided to cheat and use shop-bought stuff instead.
So you need to hold it taut, and then we're going to twist it clockwise.
Now they've got to twist the separate wire strands together.
It's completely even, isn't it? It just evens
It works itself out, yeah. As long as
Once they've twisted 2 wires together, they repeat it, then join 3 pairs together to make a really thick strand.
They're really springy, aren't they, with 3? Oh, dear.
They've still got their work cut out for them. Hours more twisting in store before we'll see a finished torque. Experimental archaeology like this can help us understand how Iceni craftsmen made their masterpieces. But it can also deliver valuable insights into everyday Iceni life. At Butser Ancient Farm in Hampshire, there's a huge experiment going on. They're trying to find out what villages might have looked like in Boudica's time. This isn't just an Iron Age Disneyland, is it?
No, no, no. The site was set up as an archaeological research site for archaeologists to test their theories. They might have excavated something and found artefacts and thought they might have made it like this, or they might have used it for this, but until you can actually try it out and prove that it was possible to use it or make it in that way, you don't really know that that's true. So that's what this site is all about.
So all of these are reproduced from different archaeological sites?
Yes, they're all our houses here are copies of houses that have been excavated somewhere else.
Luckily for us, Butser has got reconstructions of Iron Age roundhouses, the very type of homes that were probably built by the Iceni. Traces of an Iron Age roundhouse like this are exactly what Will and his team are after at their dig in Caistor. It would give them solid proof of an Iron Age settlement sitting beneath the Roman town of Venta Icenorum. But how do you know that this is what an Iron Age house would have looked like?
We only build our houses from archaeological evidence. So we take the data from an archaeological dig, and what we're looking at is the evidence, and then we build from that evidence. So for this house is a copy of a house that was excavated on the outskirts of Salisbury. And when we looked at the plans, there were a ring of post holes, so the holes were these large oak posts are dug into the ground, and then out beyond that, where the wall is now, there was a ring of smaller post holes where the wall would have been, and then beyond that there is a drip trench, and all of that is very obvious in the archaeology.
And a drip trench is where all the water has run off and leaves this black ring round it?
That's right, yes.
I suppose the most obvious and dramatic thing about this hut is the fire. I would have expected a great big hole for the smoke to come out.
Well, we don't think they ever needed a hole for the smoke to come out. It acts as a kind of vortex with the shape of the roof, and the draft coming in the house will force the heat and the spark and the fire. It will try and find a way out, and it will head for that hole. And the temperature around the edge of the hole gets so hot that it will actually catch fire.
But then you do have the problem of smoke.
Well, we don't really have a problem. You see, the smoke goes up above the smoke ceiling in the house. We're not actually in the smoke ourselves now, and it will gradually trickle out through the straw, and it stops any insects living up there in the straw, and that means that birds won't want to come along and pull the straw apart to eat those insects, and it keeps the roof in one piece.
So Iron Age houses were far more sophisticated than you might have imagined. The Iceni may have left no written history, but thanks to the finds and experimental archaeology, a picture emerges of a tribe who are rich, both in cash terms and in their culture. And at the very pinnacle of this culture, the greatest flowering of the tribe, torqs, the most beautiful of all the artifacts they left behind. Only their very greatest craftsmen would have mastered the art of torq making. So, are Helen and Dana up to the job?
So now this is scary.
Good luck.
If you'd like to see more episodes like this, you can make it happen. Join over 10,000 Patreon members worldwide and see new digs take place and amazing additional extras.
Time Team's Helen Geek and experimental archaeologist Dana Goodburn-Brown are making a replica Iceni torq. They're using the original Iron Age methods in order to learn about the skills needed to create these fantastic objects. They've now reached the most delicate stage, attaching the ends or terminals to the collar.
Pressing that in tightly. And then pulling it up.
Try not to.
In order to faithfully reproduce Iron Age techniques, they're using a process known as the lost wax method to cast the terminal.
Golly, that's amazing to see it coming out of the clay You shouldn't kind of study these things without having tried to do this, should you?
Doesn't it give you a new appreciation?
Completely different appreciation of what all the marks on it might mean.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why I started experimenting. This is my 500 grams of silver.
Okay.
The final step is to pour molten silver into this mould. Dana must heat it to a blistering 1,000 degrees centigrade.
Okay, it's molten.
Fantastic.
So now this is scary.
Good luck. Yeah, it's come out the other side. Brilliant.
Oh, thank God for that.
Look at that. It just looks alive, doesn't it?
All that smoke means we didn't quite burn out all the wax, even though it was in the heat for so long.
So it's hammer and chisel.
Yeah.
Oh.
What do you see a hole?
No, it looks perfect. I can see that there's some relief on the front, but oh,
Is it
it's shiny. It's beautiful.
It
is so magical seeing that emerge from out of what is essentially a lump of
just
mud.
Get the rest of this away.
That's brilliant.
That's pretty close.
That's absolutely fantastic. Wait a minute, though. It's not coming
Don't pull
off.
it hard, though, just in case.
Let me feel. No, that is really solidly attached. You've done it.
If you don't look at the back and you tidy up the front, do you want to be the one?
I'll put it on.
But be careful of all those spiky bits.
I will. Oh, it's heavy.
How does it feel?
It feels good.
Do you feel important?
I do. It gives you bearing and poise. It's an important piece of jewellery, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah. Wow.
Beautiful talks like this reveal just how advanced Iceni culture must once have been. A complex, sophisticated society that had developed over many centuries. But in AD 43, this way of life was suddenly under threat. The Romans arrived in Britain, and they were going to run the country their way.
They couldn't garrison everywhere, so they used a technique which the Roman emperors had been operating ever since the time of Augustus, at least 50, 60 years before the invasion of Britain in AD 43. And that's the concept of the client king, which was this idea of having reliable states on your frontiers that are your friends that are on side, who you subsidise and keep under control. And that's what they did with a lot of lowland Britain.
11 British tribes signed up to become client kingdoms, including the Iceni. On the surface, it was a good deal. The Iceni gained the clout and support of Rome against their enemies, while Rome acquired an ally who'd look after her local interests. At first, this setup worked well.
The top people really adopted this Roman way of life. And as for the poor people at the bottom of society, the peasant farmers, they were living essentially an Iron Age way of life in their round houses. And they were quite happy as long as the Romans left them alone.
They've had to give up their weapons. To a warrior people, giving up your arms is the ultimate in humiliation. These are sacred. These are heirloom objects invested with a soul of their own, probably passed down through the generations. They have incredible personal and spiritual value. So there's no way you're going to give them up willingly. And it's not as if the Romans are going to care for them, take them away, look after them. They took them and they broke them. It's a sacrilege beyond speaking. So there is bound to be some kind of response to that, and it's going to be violent.
For some of these proud warrior peoples, disarmament must have been the last straw. They could no longer tolerate meddlesome foreign invaders in their midst. The time had come to stand up and resist. The time had come for revolt. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, things finally came to a head right here in North Cambridgeshire, site of a vicious battle. Phil Harding's looking for evidence of that decisive encounter.
You know, it strikes me there's no landmarks at all. How much further is it to this hill for?
Oh, come on, can't you see? We're approaching one of the most important archaeological monuments in the whole of Cambridgeshire, just up ahead.
You're having a laugh. Where I come from, we have hill forts. We have them and we put them on hills.
Well, to be honest, I'm from Scotland. I know what you mean about hills.
So, this is Stonea Camp. It's actually quite impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, we think so.
So, ultimately, the Roman demands got too much for the Iceni. Their tolerance snapped, and they revolted. So what was the response of the Romans?
Well, I mean, obviously, with the Iceni and the client kingdom, you know, basically bucking the authority of the emperor, the Romans, they just weren't going to stand for that. And so they were sending their troops out to basically impose the emperor's will on the Iceni.
Tacitus writes in his Annals about an important event that took place in this part of the country. The surrounding tribes chose a site for a battle enclosed by a rough earthwork, with an entrance narrow enough to prevent cavalry getting in. And according to Stephen, Stonea could be that very spot.
We're talking of the first archaeological site that enters the historical record in the entire British Isles.
And not only have we got the historic record, we've actually got the archaeological record to go with it.
Well, absolutely, and this is a rare example of a human skeleton that actually shows the signs of how the person died. So what we have here, this is a 3 or 4 year old, and you can see here there's been a sword blow that's cut right across here and basically, you know, shattered the skull in two. They've been slaughtered, you know, where they're living, where they're standing, and the Roman soldiers, you know, they're running riot, there's bloodlust. It's brutal, it's deadly, and it's horrific.
We don't know how many Britons died at Stonea, but it seems likely it was a huge number. The tribes had learned the true meaning of the client relationship. Stonea was a stark message to anyone else thinking of causing trouble. The Iceni remained a client kingdom, and in the wake of this battle, Prasutagus, Boudica's husband, became king. Some experts believe this rare coin may bear his image. With the tribes beaten into submission, the Roman army headed back west to mop up the last Druid rebels.
I think once the big battle at Stonea is over, we have a defeated, subjugated, humiliated people. They've had to give up their weapons. They have probably lost whatever remained of their really good warriors at that time. So their best hope would be to sit tight and hope that the Western tribes prevail.
It proved harder than the Romans had expected to finish off the Druids, and the battles in the west dragged on. Then in 59 AD, Prasutagus died. Under the Roman system, client kings were expected to leave their entire wealth and kingdom to Rome. But the Emperor Nero got only half in this case. Prasutagus left the other half to his family.
I think perhaps he anticipated that there might be problems, and he thought that by leaving the Emperor Nero half his estate, that would satisfy the Emperor, and he would allow the Iceni to carry on as they had been.
But it didn't work.
No, it didn't. It went wrong for a whole variety of reasons. Decianus Catus, the financial procurator of Britain, he and his officials essentially seized the opportunity that now Prasutagus is dead, they can go in and seize all they like from the Iceni. And they do that. They're carpetbaggers, ripping the place off. The climactic event of which, of course, is the flogging of Boudica and the raping of her daughters. Probably an episode that was reflected in lots of different households across the whole tribal region.
The unimaginable horror of these events. Her children raped by soldiers, and she herself enduring a public flogging. For Boudica, this must have turned the world upside down. She no longer had anything to lose. Boudica made her decision and led her tribe into revolt.
They have been waiting years for this. They've been plotting probably quite a long time. They've been making their swords in secret, gathering everything together. I think they're the pressure cooker about to blow the lid.
Colchester was the Roman capital of Britain, and the obvious target for the full force of Iceni fury. And with the bulk of the Roman army away fighting in Wales, it was defended by just 200 soldiers. It proved to be a miserably inadequate force. The rebellious tribe and their allies attacked in their thousands, baying for blood. Terrified residents fled for what seemed to be the safest place, the massive temple in the centre of town. A Norman castle today stands directly over the original Roman foundations. There can't be many places in England where you can walk into an enclosed Roman space.
No, these are the vaults of the imperial temple of the divine Claudius, and it was the only thing that offered any protection, but it wasn't enough. And the Britons, the Iceni and the Trinovantes, are going absolutely stir-fry crazy in the city. They're killing everything they can get their hands on, men, women and children. But these British, tribal, Celtic people are absolutely obsessed with the head. This is the ultimate symbol. There's going to be a huge amount of decapitation, yanking off the heads of the people that they've killed and waving their trophy as they charge out of Colchester, and they find a statue of the emperor. And they cut his head off too. What an incredibly powerful and totemic thing that was. And they hurl the head into a river in Suffolk, where it's found centuries later, and it's now in the British Museum.
The petrified residents held out in the temple for 2 days. Huddled inside were women and children, families of Roman soldiers, along with Britons who'd embraced the Roman way of life. As far as Boudica was concerned, they were all collaborating with the invaders, and in a brutal, bloody massacre, the Iceni slaughtered the lot. By the time the battle was over, Colchester was a smouldering ruin. Once she'd won here, did Boudica stay put?
No, she's absolutely on a roll, and the rebels churn straight down the road towards London, and meanwhile, at that particular point, the governor of the province of Britain, Suetonius Paulinus, has charged ahead with an advance force down from Anglesey. He gets to London before Boudica, and he realises he cannot possibly hold the city. Boudica comes into London and burns that city to the ground too, and it's total mayhem there as well. Suetonius Paulinus has meanwhile gone back through St Albans and up Watling Street, so we assume, and Boudica gets there too, and she completely destroys that city as well.
The Roman commander Paulinus rushed his armies back from the west, where they'd been fighting the Druids. He knew if he was to defeat Boudica, he'd have to meet her on his terms. He laid his trap, luring her into battle somewhere on the ancient roadway Watling Street. The hour of reckoning was here.
They defeat her. They wipe out the rebellion, which may well have been falling apart anyway. Let's face it, what did she have to offer people? Total destruction, disorder, chaos. And because the rebels hadn't planted their crops, there was famine. The point is really that that is the end of the revolt, and that's the end of the historical version of the story. From then on, we can only find out about what happened to the Iceni after that through archaeology.
Boudica was dead. No tribal leader could stand up for long against the ruthless, disciplined and battle-hardened Roman legions. Most of Britain was now firmly under the yoke of Roman rule and would remain so for centuries to come. But what became of Boudica's tribe, the Iceni? Archaeologists from the University of Nottingham are now making good progress on their dig at Caistor St Edmund. They're hoping to find clues to the Iceni's fate in the Roman town subsequently built in the heart of their territory, Venta Icenorum.
1700 years ago, we would have been walking down the main street of the Roman town. Just over to our right behind me would have been the forum, where the main public business of the town would have been carried out. Down towards the left would have been the bathhouse, and if you were feeling religious, on our right there was a pair of temples.
And the basilica?
The basilica was attached to the forum, and this would have been where the main business of justice and administration would have been carried out.
These are the large public buildings the first dig found back in 1929. They're what led them to think of the place as a major Roman town. Their lead archaeologist, Donald Atkinson, believed it was built just after Boudica's revolt in order to pacify the Iceni. But a new dig led by Will Bowden is now painting a subtler picture. In the second of Will's 2 trenches, he's finding evidence of the type of activity that went on in the Roman town.
One of the nicest things we've had is this, a piece of pottery with some incised script on it. It's
I mean, the thing that strikes me about it is how well executed these letters are. I mean, they are, to me, the product of a really literate hand.
Yeah, one of the things that we find constantly here are huge numbers of these. This is an iron stylus, so it's a writing implement for writing on wax tablets.
I mean, this is the crucial indicator of literacy, isn't it? Of the level of administration that were going on in the town.
That's right. There would have been record keeping, records of taxation in particular. It was the administrative capital of the region, and you're holding the evidence for it in your hand.
But as the dig progresses, things are becoming ever more mysterious. Not everything in the town is exactly what you'd expect from a bustling regional power centre. The geophys results have revealed that whole swathes were underdeveloped, with large areas left derelict. As soon as you look beyond the town centre, things start to look very run down.
What about over here? Well, this area is rather more empty. The geophysics seems to show that throughout the town we have large empty areas, and it's quite likely that within the walls of the town there would have been grazing space, market gardening, so away from the main thoroughfares perhaps there would have been rather less of a dense landscape.
I find that intriguing because I always think of Roman towns as being full of hustle and bustle and life, but that's not the picture you're painting.
Yes, I think we tend to see reconstructions of Roman towns which are very densely occupied, lots of nice little white buildings with tiled roofs and this sort of thing. But certainly here, away from the main thoroughfares, I think there would have been a lot of open space and simple, quite often simple agricultural activities.
So a bit more of a shanty town?
Yeah, a certain Wild West feel to it, I think.
It's the last thing they expected. Venta Icenorum's not a major Roman town, it's a fly-blown outpost. Will's second trench only makes things look worse.
Effectively, what we're standing on is a major Roman rubbish dump.
Ah.
And it's this rubbish dump which would have really have filled this part of the town, I think.
So what does this trench tell us then about the town as a whole?
Well, it tells us that we need to start rethinking our perceptions of what the Roman town looked like.
In what way?
Well, it's not a densely populated town full of buildings. Although we're still well within the street grid here, there's seemingly not a lot going on.
That's archaeologists speak for there's nothing there. So evidence from the excavation is forcing us to rethink the story of this town. It no longer looks like an important regional power base or thriving commercial centre. But just because the town failed to thrive doesn't mean it wasn't built to punish the rebellious Iceni. Only more digging will reveal whether the Romans annihilated an Iceni settlement to make way for their own town. Did the Romans commit an act of genocide, wiping out the Iceni as revenge for Boudica's revolt?
Join a thriving worldwide community of Time Team fans on Patreon. Your ongoing membership enables us to develop more sites and more episodes.
The Roman town of Venta Icenorum doesn't seem to be the big bustling place we once thought it was. Quite the reverse. New archaeology is showing it to be a bit of a dump. But in the second of their trenches, the Nottingham archaeologists are now uncovering one of the strange circles that showed up on their geophys results. They're hoping it will be the remains of an Iron Age roundhouse. If they're right, the dig will achieve its goal. Solid evidence of an Iron Age Iceni settlement built on this spot before the Roman town. It's the moment of truth. All right, the big question. Is this Iron Age?
No.
Ah. Absolutely not.
Absolutely not, no. All the material we've had out of it is Roman. So it's 2nd century, something like that.
Roundhouses continued to be built for hundreds of years after the Romans' arrival, and this one was definitely constructed after Boudica's revolt. So there's still no evidence of an Iron Age Iceni town below Roman Venta Icenorum. And if there was no town here before the Romans arrived, there was nothing to raise to the ground. So the Roman town may not have been built as an act of vengeance. Then why is it here?
Britain doesn't have any towns when the Romans arrive here, or not very many things that are like towns, so they set them up. This one is called Venta Icenorum, or the marketplace of the Iceni, which tells us straight away that this place was set up to be the administrative headquarters of the region that the Iceni lived in.
Unless it was already the marketplace of the Iceni, which they built on top of.
Yes, because the Romans would often exploit existing tribal behaviour and settlement. So most of these Roman tribal towns are on the site of a tribal settlement or very close to one.
As yet, the Nottingham archaeologists haven't found evidence of activity here before the Roman occupation. But the Romans clearly felt they needed a trading and administrative settlement in this part of the world. Perhaps they didn't wipe out the Iceni rebels, just absorbed them into their empire.
There aren't enough Romans to run the Roman Empire, so the best way you do it is you get everybody local to be as Roman as you can make them and get them to do things the Roman way. And then the whole government system of Rome feeds down out through the urban administration. And you get the local worthies to be the magistrates, to be the people sitting on the town council.
And there's now good evidence of substantial numbers of Iceni people moving into Venta Icenorum. Not all of them turned overnight into paid-up toga-wearing Romans, far from it. Evidence from the dig reveals that the Iceni clung on to many of their old ways. First off, the roundhouses. No Roman would have lived in one of these. But that's not all.
We've got 3 vessels here. We've got a large container vessel, smashed up. That piece is inverted. We've got a smaller vessel, quite fine, little pedestal base. And now we're just starting to find a mortario bowl. That's the spout there. There's the big side bits.
Wow.
It's not just rubbish, is it? Well, it could be, but it's interesting rubbish. It's like a giant mixing bowl, really. And you'd use a pestle to grind your herbs or your whatever you're trying to do. You might be tenderising meat in it. And your olive oil goes in there, and that's why we've got the spout here, because once you've mixed everything up, you pour it out. Every good Roman household should have a mortario or 2 kicking around.
Lovely.
Okay.
That's very nice.
I wonder if we've got the whole thing.
Yes, we do.
God, we have, haven't we? Look at that. Well, it looks pretty whole, pretty complete, apart from maybe this piece of damage here, this chip. So maybe that earmarked it for chucking away or burial. Look at that, there's a little pedestal-based cup there. So there's more vessels, you know, we've had a few now. And the mortario itself, there's another big sherd of pottery that's underneath it, so it's almost like they're layered one on top of the other at the moment. So, you know, that seems fairly deliberate to me, rather than just throwing it randomly into a pit.
We're now thinking that pits have formed and things put in them in a very structured way for particular reasons. We know this is a practice which is well recognised from the Iron Age, but it's quite possible that it's also continuing into the Roman period as well.
The Iceni probably buried their torques in careful layers as part of some kind of ritual. But it seems they may have continued to follow this practice in the Roman era with the objects they had to hand. And there's a further clue built into the very fabric of the town. The diggers revealed a diagonal road running through the middle of Venta Icenorum. It's totally out of character for Roman road builders. They always laid out their roads running north-south or east-west. And this road leads to an intriguing area on the edge of the town.
You say that there's a temple beyond us, outside the walls. Is it related to anything earlier?
Well, it's situated within a sort of quite a dense landscape of prehistoric monuments which lie to the north of the town.
So the whole area out there has been important from a religious function, probably from well into prehistoric times.
Yes, you would think so.
The diagonal road linking the temples has been well used in the Roman period. There's a black line of a worn wheel rut, suggesting both Roman temples and the Iceni religious sites were active at the same time. So the Iceni may have moved into a Roman town, but they weren't all becoming fully Romanized. And there's certainly no indication of the Romans wiping out the Iceni. Given all of this evidence, is there still any chance the Roman town was built to punish them? Could this place be an imperial statement, a punishment imposed by the Romans?
No, this isn't a punishment. This is the way the Romans tried to run every part of the empire. And this is a mini Rome, it's a mini Pompeii. The whole thing would have been set up like that. The thing about this town is it never really seems to have worked particularly well.
The way Will talks about it, it does sound like a pretty run-down place.
Yeah, and perhaps the real punishment for the Iceni is that they were completely marginalised, not just from the Roman Empire, but they're even the fag end of Roman Britain.
Given the undeveloped areas, it's pretty certain that Venta Icenorum was never a thriving place. The Iceni never seem to have really made a go of this town.
I don't think the Iceni were ready for it. They didn't need towns. They were essentially a rural people. They had a rural lifestyle that worked and got better throughout the Roman period. Towns were a Mediterranean invention, and their time hadn't come in Britain. And when the Romans left, the towns died, and we had to reinvent them 200 years later, but in a very different North European style this time.
The Iceni remain an enigma. Boudica led them into an all-out battle. But far from establishing a new Iceni golden age, her revolt may have been the undoing of her tribe. They lived on and may even have prospered under the Romans, but there was no longer any doubt about who was in control of these lands. Rome had shown her iron fist, and the Iceni people seem to have faded away into history. They never again made their incredible torques, and little sophisticated metalwork is found after the Roman conquest. Their territory, modern-day East Anglia, became something of a backwater, just as it is today. The two brief but violent years of history that Boudica occupied shouldn't distort our perception of her people, because the Iceni had been around long before Boudica showed up. And it wasn't a backwater tribe. This was a complex, talented, dynamic people who just happened to be on the receiving end of the military might of a huge empire. But they did leave behind some of the greatest archaeological finds the world has ever seen, not to mention a fantastic story. Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.